I woke up that morning expecting nothing unusual. I made my tea, opened my curtains, and walked to the little drawer where I always kept my father's watch. But the velvet box wasn't there. At first, my heart didn't panic. I simply thought I had moved it. I checked the nightstand, the bathroom, even the laundry basket. When it didn't appear, a cold tremor ran through my body, the kind that tells you something is terribly wrong. I whispered to myself, "It has to be here," though doubt already settled in. As the minutes passed, I tore my bedroom apart. Pillows flew, drawers opened, cabinets emptied. The watch was nowhere. A heaviness pressed against my chest, making each breath shallow. That watch wasn't jewelry. It was the last thing my father touched before he died. My hands trembled as the realization grew. It was gone. Truly gone. The panic became overwhelming, and I sat on the edge of my bed, hands covering my face, trying not to completely break down. My son heard the noise and came upstairs. When I told him I couldn't find the watch, he shrugged casually and said, "You probably misplaced it, Mom." His indifference hurt. He didn't understand that losing that watch felt like losing my father again. My daughter-in-law appeared behind him, offering a polite frown that didn't match her eyes. She suggested I check the trash, as if I were some confused old woman who threw away family heirlooms. Her tone sliced through me, but I swallowed my pride. I spent the next hours searching every corner of the house, every drawer, every coat pocket. I even searched the basement, though I hadn't been down there for months. By the afternoon, exhaustion wrapped around me, and tears blurred my vision. I eventually found the empty velvet box tucked behind towels in the closet, hidden, not misplaced. That discovery felt like a punch to the gut. Someone had moved it intentionally. Someone had taken the watch. I clutched the empty box to my chest and whispered, "Dad, I'm so sorry." The grief was unbearable. My son said nothing, too distracted with his phone, while my daughter-in-law watched me with a strange calmness that I didn't yet know how to interpret. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house reminded me of him, how he would walk softly to avoid waking me when I was little. The silence was suffocating. I couldn't understand how something so precious could disappear without a trace. I blamed myself, believing I had failed to protect my father's memory. I had no idea that someone in my own home had already pawned it away. 3 weeks passed, each one stretching painfully. The grief didn't fade. It grew roots. I avoided the drawer where the watch once lived, because each glance reminded me of my failure. My daughter-in-law never brought it up again, always changing the subject with suspicious speed. My son simply repeated, "It's just an object." He didn't understand. He didn't even try. I felt more alone than ever. One afternoon, while watering my plants, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers usually meant trouble or salespeople. But something urged me to pick up. "Ma'am," a calm male voice said, "I'm sorry to bother you, but I believe I have something that belongs to you." My breath caught in my throat. I gripped the phone and asked what he meant. "A gold watch," he said, with the initials HEM engraved on the back. I nearly dropped the phone. Every nerve in my body jolted awake. My father's initials. His watch. I sank into my chair. The man introduced himself as the owner of a pawn shop downtown. He explained that the watch had been pawned weeks ago, but something about the woman who brought it in didn't sit right with him. He said she looked nervous, detached, too eager to get rid of it. He told me he had tried calling the woman when the payment deadline came, but she never answered. "I didn't feel comfortable selling something so personal," he continued. "So, I did some digging." My heartbeat echoed in my ears. He explained he searched records and found my name attached to my father's obituary. He believed I might be the real owner. "I'm sorry if this upsets you," he said gently. I swallowed hard before asking for the name of the person who pawned it. A long pause followed. Then he said her name, my daughter-in-law's. My blood ran cold. My body stiffened. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and foolish all at once. Someone inside my home had stolen from me. Not for survival, Not for necessity, but for convenience. The pawnbroker apologized for his role in all this. He told me he felt morally obligated to return the watch. I thanked him through tears I couldn't stop. When I hung up, I stared at the wall for a long time. A silence heavier than grief filled the room. My daughter-in-law had crossed a line I never imagined anyone in my family would dare to cross. I waited until evening, trying to steady my breath, my thoughts, my rage. My son and daughter-in-law returned home laughing about something trivial, unaware of the storm waiting for them. I sat in the living room, the lights dim, holding the empty velvet box in my lap. When they entered, my son joked, "Mom, why are you sitting in the dark?" But I didn't laugh. I lifted my gaze slowly and said, "We need to talk." His smile faded instantly. My daughter-in-law stiffened the moment she saw the velvet box. Her eyes widened, not with guilt, but with calculation. She glanced at my son before forcing a shaky smile. "Did you find the watch?" she asked, pretending innocence. The audacity almost made me gasp. I took a slow breath, trying not to scream. "A man called me today," I said softly. "From a pawnshop." The room froze. My daughter-in-law's fingers twitched. My son blinked, confused. I watched her throat tighten. What did he say?" she whispered. Her voice cracked. My son looked between us, lost. I held the empty box out toward her. "He said the watch was pawned. Weeks ago. And he gave me the name of the person who pawned it." The color drained from her face. My son looked at her, his confusion shifting into suspicion. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She was cornered, and she knew it. After a long, suffocating silence, she finally spoke. I borrowed it," she stammered. "I meant to put it back. I just needed money temporarily. For my sister's tuition. I didn't think you'd notice." Her voice trembled with false remorse. The lie stung harder than the truth. My son rubbed his forehead, muttering, "You what?" as if reality were too heavy to process. I could see the cracks forming in his trust. I stood up slowly, steadying myself on the armrest. "You watched me cry over it," I said. "You watched me tear this house apart looking for it. You saw my grief. And you said nothing." My voice shook, not with weakness, but with strength. She looked at the floor. My son turned his back to her, taking a few steps away, speechless. The tension in the room was thick enough to suffocate. She reached out toward him, whispering, "I did it for my sister," his jaw clenched. "Stealing from my mother isn't helping your sister," he said coldly. "It's betrayal." She broke down, sobbing, but her tears felt wrong, self-preserving, not repentant. I walked past both of them, heading to my room, heart pounding. The damage was done. The truth was out. But I sensed this confrontation was only the beginning. The real storm was still coming. The next morning, I dressed more carefully than usual. It felt like I was preparing for a funeral, and in a way, I was the funeral of any innocence I still believed existed in my home. I took the bus downtown, clutching my purse as if it carried my entire past. The pawn shop was in an older part of the city, squeezed between a bakery and a hardware store. Its windows were cluttered with guitars, old TVs, and jewelry that once meant something to someone. My heart pounded as I stepped inside. The air smelled like metal and dust. Behind the counter stood a man in his 50s with kind, tired eyes. He recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Miller?" he asked gently. I nodded, unable to speak. He reached under the counter and carefully placed a small velvet pad in front of me. On it lay my father's watch. The familiar scratch on the glass. The worn leather strap. The engraving on the back. My knees almost gave out. I reached forward with trembling fingers and touched it like one might touch a loved one's face. "I knew it wasn't hers," he said quietly. I looked up, confused. He went on, "The woman who brought it in, she said it belonged to her confused mother-in-law. Said you didn't remember things anymore. That you told her she could sell it to help pay for family expenses." His jaw tightened. But the way she said it, something felt off. There was no respect in her voice. No grief. Each word was a blade cutting into the little trust one had left. He showed me the pawn ticket with her signature. There, in black ink, was my daughter-in-law's name. No hesitation, no disguise. She hadn't even tried to hide it. I kept it aside, he continued. I couldn't shake the feeling that this watch still had a story that wasn't finished. Tears blurred my vision. You were right, I whispered. It did. I picked up the watch and flipped it over, tracing my father's initials. For the first time in weeks, I felt his presence again. I asked him if my daughter-in-law had said anything else. He hesitated, then nodded. She complained about you, he admitted. Said you were dramatic, stuck in the past, always playing the victim. She laughed when I asked if you'd be okay without it. His voice hardened slightly. I don't like people who laugh when they talk about the elderly suffering. Shame burned my skin, not because of what I had done, but because of what I had allowed inside my home. I thanked him over and over, wishing I could repay him for more than just the receipt. He waved it off, saying, "Just promise me you'll keep it safe this time." I slipped the watch into my purse, close to my heart. As I walked out of the pawn shop, the city felt different, colder. I realized that the betrayal wasn't just about money or an object. It was about how little my pain mattered to the woman who shared my last name. That evening, my son suggested we all have dinner together, to talk calmly. Calm was the last thing I felt, but I agreed. I wanted to see how far my daughter-in-law would go to protect her lies. I set the table as usual, placing plates, silverware, and glasses with careful precision. In the center, I lit a candle, not for romance, but for clarity. I wore my father's watch on my wrist, the metal warm against my skin, like a hidden weapon. When they came downstairs, my son noticed the watch first. His eyes widened. "You got it back," he said quietly. My daughter-in-law froze halfway down the stairs, her gaze landing on my wrist. The color drained from her face. She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, you found it," she said, voice too bright, too fast. I held her gaze and replied, "No, I didn't find it. It was returned to me." The room grew heavy. We sat down to eat, but no one touched the food. My son finally broke the silence. "We need to discuss what happened," he said, looking at his wife. She shifted in her chair. "I already explained," she snapped softly. "I borrowed it. I meant to get it back. I just got overwhelmed." Her excuses spilled out like rehearsed lines. She talked about tuition deadlines, pressure from her family, the guilt she felt about her sister dropping out. The story was smooth, but something important was missing: genuine remorse. I listened carefully, then asked, "Did you also borrow my dignity when you told that man I was senile?" Her mouth fell open. My son frowned. "What is she talking about?" he demanded. I turned to him and repeated the pawnbroker's words, how she'd painted me as confused, forgetful, desperate for money. How she laughed about my grief. Each detail tightened his jaw, darkened his gaze. He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. She panicked. "He's lying," she insisted. "He misunderstood me. You know how people exaggerate." She reached for my son's hand, but he pulled it away. "Did you say those things about my mother or not?" he asked coldly. She hesitated for half a second, and that was enough. That tiny pause shouted the truth louder than any confession. I watched my son's shoulders sag as the weight of her betrayal settled on him. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. Instead, I spoke softly. "This isn't about money," I said. "This is about respect. If you could lie so easily about me to a stranger, what else have you lied about?" The candle flickered between us, casting long shadows on the walls. My daughter-in-law's face hardened. She knew the performance was over. Masks were slipping. And for the first time, my son realized that the person he thought he knew might be someone entirely different. My son didn't sleep that night. I heard him pacing in the hallway long after the house had gone quiet. Doors opening. Doors closing. Soft murmurs through the walls as he questioned his wife, trying to make sense of the person she had revealed herself to be. I stayed in my room, listening, heart heavy but resolute. I didn't enjoy their suffering, but some truths demand to be faced, no matter how painful. By morning, he looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, shoulders slumped, voice hoarse. At breakfast, the silence was suffocating. My daughter-in-law didn't meet my eyes once. She stirred her coffee until it went cold, then pushed the mug away. My son finally spoke, his voice barely steady. "I don't know who you are anymore," he said to her. She flinched. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "One mistake." But it wasn't one. It was many: lies, manipulation, cruelty disguised as convenience. And now the consequences were unfolding in front of her, unavoidable and raw. She turned her attention to me, voice trembling. I apologized. "What more do you want?" The question echoed strangely in the kitchen. What did I want? Respect. Integrity. A shred of remorse that wasn't filtered through self-preservation. But wanting those things from someone who couldn't give them was like begging the wind to stop blowing. I answered calmly, "I don't want anything from you, but you owe my son the truth." My son looked away, as if bracing for impact. She began crying, loud, dramatic tears that filled the room like fog. "Your mother hates me," she sobbed. "She always has. I can't win with her." I swallowed hard. There it was, the victim mask, the one she used whenever she felt cornered. My son rubbed his temples. "Stop making this about her," he said sharply. "This is about what you did." Her tears stopped instantly, like a switch had been flipped. Her expression hardened. Something shifted in my son. Something irreversible. Betrayal doesn't just break trust. It rewires it. He stood up slowly. "I need space," he said. She panicked, grabbing his shirt, begging, promising to change. But her words were empty. Energy, without sincerity. "I'm going to work," he said, gently removing her hands. She collapsed into her chair as the door closed behind him. I watched silently, knowing some fractures never heal. She turned to me then, tears replaced by cold fire. "You ruined everything," she hissed. I held her gaze. "No," I said softly. "You did." She stormed upstairs, slamming doors like thunder. I exhaled shakily, my father's watch warm against my wrist. Little did I know that what happened next would expose even more secrets, ones my son had no idea he'd been living alongside. Later that afternoon, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I expected my son, but the footsteps were too light, too hesitant. When the doorbell rang, I opened it to find a young man, barely in his 20s, shifting nervously on the porch. He held a small stack of envelopes, tied with twine. His clothes were neat but worn, and his expression carried both shame and determination. "Are you Mrs. Miller?" he asked. I nodded slowly, unsure what to expect. I'm the pawnbroker's son," he said, clutching the envelopes tighter. "My father asked me to bring these to you." Confused, I stepped aside and let him in. He sat awkwardly on the edge of the sofa before handing me the bundle. Inside were transaction notes, timestamps, and security snapshots, everything documenting when my daughter-in-law brought in the watch. But there was something else, a letter in the pawnbroker's handwriting, explaining why he wanted me to have it all. "My dad said the woman was disrespectful," the young man explained softly. "He said she talked about you like you weren't a person." My chest tightened. He continued, he didn't want her to come back and try to twist the story. "He said you might need proof someday." I swallowed hard, overwhelmed by gratitude and sorrow. Strangers were showing me more kindness than someone who shared my home. As I thanked him, he hesitated. "There's one more thing." He pulled out his phone and opened a short video, security footage from inside the pawn shop. There she was, my daughter-in-law, laughing, rolling her eyes, calling me a fragile old lady who wouldn't even notice the watch was gone. She joked that old people cling to useless things. The words shattered something inside me. The young man lowered his gaze. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I breathed slowly, fighting tears that burned hot behind my eyes. "Thank you for bringing this," I said. "It means more than you know." As he left, I watched his car disappear down the road, holding the bundle of evidence in my trembling hands. I knew what I had to do next, but it would tear the remaining seams of our family wide open. When my son returned home that evening, he looked drained, worn down by the weight of everything he had learned in the past 24 hours. He dropped his keys on the counter and rubbed the back of his neck before even acknowledging me. I didn't blame him. Betrayal shakes a man in ways that make even a familiar home feel foreign. I waited until he sat down before placing the small stack of envelopes on the table between us. His eyes narrowed. "What's that?" I opened the twine and spread the documents out. Pawn tickets, timestamps, and the letter from the pawnbroker. My son scanned them slowly, confusion shifting into shock, then into something far darker. "She signed with her real name?" he murmured. "She didn't even try to hide it?" I nodded. He clenched his jaw, nostrils flaring. "Why would she?" His voice trailed off, but we both knew why, because she never believed there would be consequences. Then I showed him the video. He watched in silence, elbows on the table, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white. My daughter-in-law appeared on the screen, laughing, calling me a fragile old lady who exaggerates everything, rolling her eyes like a teenager mocking a teacher. When she joked that old people don't need sentimental junk, my son's face collapsed. "She said that about you?" he whispered. His voice cracked. "About my mother?" He sat back, stunned, as if the floor beneath him had shifted. "My God," he muttered. "I defended her. I thought you were being unfair." He covered his face with both hands, shoulders trembling. I placed my hand gently on his arm. "You believed your wife. That's understandable." He shook his head. "No. I should have believed you." There was grief in his eyes, not just for what she had done to me, but for what she had done to him. Before we could say anything else, we heard her footsteps coming downstairs. She appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, expression sour. "What's going on?" she demanded. My son's jaw tightened as he pushed the laptop toward her. "Explain this." She glanced at the screen, then quickly looked away, masking panic with disdain. "Seriously? You're believing a random stranger over your own wife," she scoffed. "Pawnshop people lie." My son slammed his hand on the table hard enough to rattle the glasses. "Stop lying," he shouted. She flinched. "You humiliated my mother. You stole from her. You mocked her. And you lied to me about it." She rolled her eyes, an instinct she couldn't suppress, even in the face of proof. "It's just a watch," she snapped. "Why is everyone so dramatic?" My son stared at her like she was a stranger who had walked into our home. I looked at her and said, "It wasn't a watch. It was my father's life." She shrugged. Actually shrugged. A gesture so dismissive my heart clenched. That was the moment my son seemed to snap out of whatever spell he had been under. He stood slowly and said, "Pack a bag." She froze, eyes wide. "What?" He repeated, "Pack a bag." And for the first time since she entered our family, she realized the consequences were finally real. She didn't move at first. She stood there, stunned, like a child caught doing something unforgivable. "You can't be serious," she whispered, voice trembling. My son didn't look away. "I'm completely serious." She tried to approach him, but he stepped back, keeping distance between them like her touch carried poison. "It was a mistake," she insisted. "I told you that." He shook his head. "Stealing is not a mistake. Lying is not a mistake. Mocking my mother is not a mistake." Seeing her manipulative confidence crumble was like watching glass shatter in slow motion. "Where am I supposed to go?" she cried. "To your sister," my son replied coldly. "Since her education seems more valuable to you than this family." Her mouth fell open, but no sound came out. She looked at me as if expecting sympathy. All I offered was silence. Sometimes silence is the most powerful statement a wounded person can make. She stomped upstairs, every step echoing through the house like a tantrum. Moments later, the sound of drawers slamming filled the air. My son sank into a chair, rubbing his face. "How did I not see this?" he muttered. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Love blinds us," I said, "but it also wakes us up when it's time." He exhaled shakily, nodding. For the first time in months, I saw clarity in his eyes, clarity she had spent years trying to dim. When she came back down with a small suitcase, her face was a mask of outrage and fear. "You'll regret this," she warned him. "Throwing away your marriage over an old watch." He didn't falter. "I'm saving my dignity," he replied. "Something you clearly don't have." She glared at me, venom in her eyes. "This is your fault." I stayed calm. "Do not punish me for your actions," I said gently. She stormed toward the door, pausing only to deliver one final blow. "You're both pathetic," she spat before slamming it behind her. The house shook with the impact, but the silence that followed was peaceful, like a storm finally passing. My son rested his head in his hands. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. "I'm so sorry for everything." I squeezed his shoulder. "You didn't betray me," I said softly. She did. That night, the house felt lighter, quieter. For the first time in a long time, I felt safe in my own home. But little did we know, her absence didn't mean the end of the chaos. Sometimes, people don't accept their downfall quietly. Sometimes, they come back louder, more desperate, and more dangerous than before. A week passed without a word from her. The house was calmer, the air clearer, and my son seemed to breathe for the first time in years. He worked longer hours, not out of avoidance, but out of necessity. He was trying to rebuild pieces of himself he didn't even know were broken. I spent those days restoring my routines, cooking, tending to my plants, wearing my father's watch like armor. But peace has a strange way of attracting disturbance, and disturbance arrived at our doorstep soon enough. It happened on a Saturday morning. My son had gone to the store, and I was folding laundry in the living room when I heard furious knocking at the door. Not knocking, pounding. I opened it cautiously, and there she was. My former daughter-in-law. Eyes wild, hair disheveled, hands shaking. She pushed past me before I could react, storming into the house like a hurricane. "Where is he?" she demanded. "Where is my husband?" My heartbeat quickened, but I steadied my voice. "He's not here," she scoffed, pacing back and forth. "He won't answer my calls, my messages, nothing. He can't just abandon his marriage." Her rage filled the room, toxic and loud. When she noticed the watch on my wrist, she froze. Her eyes narrowed to slits. "Still wearing that stupid thing," she muttered. "All of this over that?" The disrespect hit me like a slap. I stood tall. "This is my father's legacy," I said. "Not a bargaining chip for your sister's tuition." She rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, please. You're so dramatic. You act like you're some tragic heroine." She stepped closer, voice low and dangerous. "You're just an old woman he feels guilty about. That's all you are." Her words were cruel, but cruelty loses power when you've already seen the monster behind the mask. Just then, the door opened and my son walked in with grocery bags. The color drained from his face. "You need to leave," he said immediately. She turned on him like a cornered animal. "We're not done," she hissed. "You owe me an explanation." He set the bags down and faced her with a calm, steady resolve I hadn't seen in years. "I owe you nothing," he said flatly. "You betrayed us. You lied. You stole. This marriage is over." Her face contorted with rage. "You're choosing her over me?" she screamed, pointing at me with shaking hands. He didn't hesitate. "I'm choosing respect over humiliation." Those words shattered her composure. She let out a scream, a raw, furious sound, before shoving past him and running out of the house. The door slammed behind her, rattling the frames on the wall. My son exhaled and leaned against the counter, his voice barely a whisper. "I think this is going to get worse before it gets better." He wasn't wrong, because when someone like her loses control, they look for new ways to regain it. And the next attempt she made to claw her way back into his life was the most reckless and dangerous one yet. 2 days passed. Just when we thought the worst was behind us, a letter arrived, official-looking, sealed, and addressed to my son. He opened it in the kitchen while I prepared tea. His face blanched. His hands trembled. "Mom," he whispered, "you need to sit down." My heart dropped. I lowered myself into a chair as he handed me the paper. At the top were words that sent a chill through my bones. Notice of complaint. She had filed a report against him, accusing him of abandonment, financial neglect, and, most shockingly, elder manipulation. My chest tightened. Elder manipulation? My son? She claimed he had controlled my finances against my will, that he isolated her, that he threatened her. Every line was a twisted version of reality, a masterclass in manipulation. She was trying to weaponize the system to force him back or punish him for leaving. My son ran both hands through his hair, pacing. I didn't even know she was capable of this, he muttered. This is insane. I steadied my breath. She's desperate, I said softly. Desperation makes people dangerous. He sat next to me, eyes filled with guilt and fear. They'll investigate, he whispered. They'll come here. They'll talk to you. They could think. I placed my hand over his. I will tell them the truth. When the officers came the next day, they were polite but firm. They asked me questions, dozens of them. Did I feel unsafe? Had my son pressured me financially? Did he limit my independence? I answered calmly, clearly, and truthfully. My son stood in the corner, face pale, terrified that a single misunderstanding could ruin his life. But as I spoke, I watched the officers' expressions soften. They saw the truth reflected in the details. To my surprise, one officer admitted quietly as he left, "We've seen this before." Vindictive spouses sometimes file these when relationships fall apart. His words offered relief, but only briefly, because as the door closed, I knew she wouldn't stop. When lies fail, people like her escalate, and escalate, and escalate, until something breaks. My son sank onto the couch, shaking. "What is she trying to do to us?" he whispered. I looked at the watch on my wrist, my father's watch, and felt strength pulse through me. "Destroy us," I said. "But she won't succeed. Not this time." Because now we had proof. And soon we would have something even stronger. Witnesses. Word travels fast in small towns, especially when someone causes trouble loud enough for the streets to hear it. Within days, the pawnbroker, who had already shown me more decency than some family members, came to the house. But this time, he wasn't alone. Beside him stood his son, the young man who had delivered the documents. They looked determined, almost protective. My son opened the door, relief flooding his face when he saw them. "We heard she filed a complaint," the pawnbroker said. His voice was steady, but there was a hint of indignation beneath it. "We're here to set the record straight." My son motioned for them to come in, and I offered them a seat. They didn't waste time. The pawnbroker placed a small folder on the coffee table, copies of the same documents his son had brought earlier, but now signed and notarized. "If they try to twist anything," he said, "we'll testify." My son looked stunned. Why are you helping us so much?" The pawnbroker exchanged a glance with his son before answering. "Because what she did was wrong. And because I've seen too many good people get trampled by lies." His son nodded. "We won't let that happen to you." Their sincerity made my throat tighten. Sometimes, real family isn't made by blood, but by integrity. They went a step further. The son pulled out a flash drive. "We pulled the security footage with the timestamp visible," he said. "It shows she came alone." "It shows what she said." "And it shows you weren't there, sir," he told my son. "That contradicts her claims of coercion or pressure." My son exhaled a shaky breath. "Thank you. Truly. We don't know how to repay you." The pawnbroker waved off the gratitude. "Just tell the truth," he said. "The rest will fall into place." Before leaving, he paused at the door. "Your daughter-in-law," he began carefully. "She's dangerous when cornered. Be careful." His son added softly, "People like her don't stop until someone forces them to." Their warning lingered in the air long after they were gone. My son turned to me, haunted. "Mom, what if she tries something else?" I squeezed his hand. "Then we'll face it. Together." That evening, as we sat quietly in the living room, I felt my father's watch pulse like a heartbeat against my wrist. A reminder that strength runs through bloodlines, that resilience is inherited. She had underestimated us. She thought we would fold under pressure. She was wrong. And the next chapter of her downfall arrived sooner than any of us expected. delivered not by the law, but by her own family. It was late afternoon when the doorbell rang again. My son and I exchanged wary glances. We had no idea who else might show up unannounced. When he opened the door, a young woman stood there, nervous, eyes red from crying, clutching her purse like a lifeline. It took me a moment to recognize her, but when I did, my breath caught. It was my daughter-in-law's sister, the one whose tuition had supposedly sparked all of this. She stepped inside hesitantly. "I need to talk to you," she said, voice shaking. She sat on the couch and took a deep breath before blurting out, "I didn't know she pawned your watch." I swear I didn't know. Tears fell onto her hands. My son frowned. "Then why are you here?" She wiped her eyes. "Because she told me something last night. Something I can't keep to myself anymore." My heart thudded. She looked straight at me. "She didn't pawn the watch for me," she said firmly. "I paid my own tuition. I have student loans, yes, but I never asked her for money." The room spun slightly. My daughter-in-law had lied even about that. "Then why did she pawn it?" my son asked, voice tightening. The sister swallowed hard. "Because she needed cash fast. She ran up a debt. Gambling. Gambling." The word cracked open a door I didn't know existed. The sister continued, "She told me she would fix everything once she won. But she lost badly." My son's face drained of color. "So she stole from my mother to cover it." The sister nodded miserably. "And when you found out," she panicked. "She wanted me to lie for her. She said you'd believe me more because I'm sweet and you think she's dramatic." Her shame was genuine, heavy, and raw. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a screenshot of messages, long threads where my daughter-in-law begged her to create a story about tuition, to defend her if questioned, to protect the family's image. The sister's hands shook. "I can't lie for her anymore," she whispered. "She's spiraling. And she's dragging everyone with her." She looked at me with pleading eyes. "I'm so sorry for what she did to you." I placed a hand over hers. "You did the right thing by coming here." My son nodded. "Thank you for telling us," he said quietly. "This changes everything." The sister sobbed harder. "Please, just be careful," she urged. "She's not thinking clearly. She's angry. She blames you both for everything." Her words sent a chill through the room. As she left, the weight of her confession settled like a storm cloud over our home. My son looked at me, shaken. "Mom," he whispered, "we haven't seen the worst yet." And he was right, because the truth about her gambling wasn't the final twist. The biggest revelation, the one that tore away every last illusion, was still waiting for us in the darkness. The night after her sister's confession, the house felt colder than usual, like the shadows themselves were holding their breath. My son barely touched his dinner. He kept checking the windows, the door, his phone. Fear can turn even familiar rooms into unsettling spaces. I tried to reassure him, but deep down, I felt it too. People who lie easily are dangerous. People who lie to survive, even more so. And people cornered by their own lies? They can become unpredictable. Around 10 o'clock, as we prepared to go upstairs, we heard it, soft footsteps outside, too slow, too deliberate to be a passerby. My son motioned for me to stay still. He peeked through the curtain and whispered, "She's outside." My pulse quickened. My daughter-in-law stood near the driveway, staring at the house with a strange, vacant expression, neither angry nor sad, but something in between. Something unhinged. She clutched her phone tightly, pacing back and forth. Suddenly, her voice echoed across the yard. "Open the door," she screamed. "You can't hide in there forever." My son stepped outside, closing the door behind him, but I could still hear every word. "You filed a false report," he said sharply. "It's over. Go home." She laughed, a sharp, unsettling sound. "Over? You think you decide when this is over." Her footsteps thudded against the pavement as she approached him. "You ruined my life." He didn't flinch. "You ruined your own life," he said. "And dragging my mother into your mess was the last straw." She exploded. "Your mother?" Always your mother, she shrieked. You think she's innocent? She wanted this. She wanted you to leave me. Her accusations cut through the night air like knives. My son kept his voice calm. Stop blaming everyone else. You gambled. You stole. You lied. His words struck her like blows. Then came the part that chilled me to the bone. She lowered her voice and hissed, You don't even know half of it. My son stiffened. What is that supposed to mean? She smirked. If you think the watch was the only thing I took from this house, you're dumber than I thought. My heart dropped. She reached into her purse and pulled out a handful of items, rings, small bills, random trinkets, things that had gone missing over months, things I had blamed on my own forgetfulness. My son's face fell. You've been stealing from my mother for how long? She shrugged with chilling nonchalance. Long enough. Her voice was flat, emotionless. You're not rich. But old people always have little things lying around. My stomach twisted. This wasn't desperation. It wasn't impulsive. It was habitual. Calculated. A pattern she had perfected long before the watch ever disappeared. My son finally snapped. Leave, he said, voice shaking with both fury and heartbreak. Right now, or I call the police. She stared at him for a long moment, eyes narrowing into something sharp and frightening. You'll regret this, she whispered. Both of you will. Then she turned and walked away into the darkness, disappearing down the street like a shadow dissolving into the night. When my son came back inside, he locked the door twice and leaned against it, breathing hard. Mom, he said faintly, this isn't just about the watch anymore. I nodded, trembling. I know, I whispered. Because now we understood the truth fully. She hadn't just betrayed us. She had been living a double life under our roof, feeding off our trust one lie at a time. And the next day, the final betrayal came to light, the one that would end everything permanently. The morning after her outburst, the house felt hollow, like all the warmth had been drained from it overnight. My son barely slept. I heard him pacing until dawn, haunted by her last words. I tried to busy myself, tidying the kitchen, watering my plants, but unease clung to me like fog. Around mid-morning, the doorbell rang. My heart jumped. For a moment, I feared she had returned. But when my son opened the door, it wasn't her. It was a police officer. He greeted us politely, but with a seriousness that made my stomach tighten. We need to speak with both of you, he said. We sat in the living room while he opened a small notepad. A complaint was filed this morning, he began. My son's eyes widened in disbelief. Again? The officer nodded. This one claims that you, he looked directly at my son, took money from her personal accounts without permission. My son laughed bitterly. That's impossible. The officer held up a hand. I'm not accusing you. I'm here to gather information. He turned to me. She also claimed that you, his tone softened, were coerced into supporting him financially. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. Nothing surprised me anymore, but the cruelty of the lie still stung. My son ran his hands through his hair. She's trying to bury us, he whispered. The officer continued. The bank flagged several suspicious transfers. They originated from accounts under her name, but were initiated from her own devices. My son frowned. So, she made the transfers and then blamed me? The officer nodded. Unfortunately, yes. It appears she is attempting to establish a pattern against you. But, he paused. Here's the problem for her. The timestamps don't support her claims. He explained that she had submitted screenshots, but they were edited. Sloppily edited. Her desperation was making her careless. Then he took out a sealed envelope. There's more, he said gravely. My son opened it and froze. Inside were printed messages between her and a contact saved as dealer 4. She had bought things, expensive things, on credit. Jewelry, designer bags, even electronics. She had debts far beyond tuition or gambling. She's been borrowing money from multiple people, the officer said. And she's using different excuses every time. My chest tightened. She wasn't just reckless. She was spiraling. A tornado destroying anything in its path. My son stared at the messages with shaking hands. All this time, he whispered, it wasn't about school, or stress, or helping her family. It was her addictions. The officer then revealed the final blow. She also filed to freeze certain joint marital assets, he said. But the judge denied it immediately due to inconsistencies in her story. My son shut his eyes, relief and devastation mixing in his expression. What does she want from us? He murmured. Why won't she stop? The officer closed his notebook. People like her don't stop until they lose everything they think they control. After he left, my son collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Mom, I don't know how much more I can take. I knelt beside him, placing my hand on his arm. You are stronger than she ever imagined, I said softly. And she is weaker than she pretends to be. For a long moment, we sat together, the room silent except for the ticking of my father's watch. Then, as if fate wanted to seal the truth once and for all, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. He opened it, and his face contorted in shock. He handed me the phone with shaking fingers. The message was a single sentence. If I can't have him, nobody will. My breath caught. A chill ran through me. Because that wasn't a threat about love, it was a threat about destruction. And now that she had nothing left to lose, the final confrontation was inevitable. The message haunted the house like a ghost. My son read it over and over, as if repetition could make it less threatening. I stood beside him, listening to the ticking of my father's watch, steady, calm, grounded, while fear pulsed through my veins. People rarely mean what they say in anger, but people like her? People who lie, steal, gamble, manipulate, and crumble when exposed? They mean every word, especially the dangerous ones. My son called the police immediately. They took the threat seriously, filing a report and advising him to stay with a friend for a few days or install temporary security. But he refused to leave me alone in the house. I'm not going anywhere, he said firmly. Not while she's like this. His loyalty warmed my heart, even as terror crept in around the edges. We locked every door, every window, double-checked every entry point. We slept lightly, listening for every sound. 2 days passed without a sign of her. Then, on the third evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, we heard a car pull into the driveway. My son looked at me, fear flashing in his eyes. Stay behind me, he said. When he opened the door, she stood there, hollow-eyed, exhausted, and strangely calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that hides a storm. She held nothing in her hands. No bags. No suitcase. Just a stillness that made my skin crawl. I'm leaving, she said softly. My son didn't relax. Good, he replied. She looked at him with an expression I couldn't decipher. Anger? Grief? Resignation? Maybe all three. You ruined my life, she said, though her voice lacked the fire it once had. I hope you're happy. My son shook his head. You ruined your own life, he answered. And you almost dragged us down with you. She flinched, as if the truth finally pierced through whatever delusions she carried. Then her gaze shifted to me. For a moment, she looked like a frightened child rather than a manipulative adult. I never meant for it to go this far, she whispered. I just didn't want to lose everything. I held her eyes. You didn't lose everything because of us, I said steadily. You lost everything because you lied. A single tear fell down her cheek. It didn't move me. Tears can be honest or strategic. I still couldn't tell which hers were. She stepped back, inhaling sharply. They're coming for me, she said quietly. The people I owe. My stomach dropped. My son tensed. What do you mean coming for you? She shook her head. Doesn't matter anymore. She glanced toward the street. I just wanted to say goodbye. There was an eerie finality in her tone, like a door closing for good. Before either of us could respond, she turned and walked down the driveway. A police car rounded the corner just as she reached the sidewalk. Then another. And another. Lights flashing silently. She didn't resist, didn't scream, didn't run. She simply placed her hands behind her back as if she'd been expecting this moment all along. The officers spoke to her quietly, guiding her into the car. My son and I stood in the doorway, watching in stunned silence. As the car door shut, she looked back at us one last time. Not with hatred, not with regret, but with emptiness. The kind that comes when all the lies collapse and nothing remains to hold a life together. Then the car drove away, disappearing into the night, taking her chaos with it. My son exhaled shakily. "It's over," he whispered, and for the first time, it truly felt like it was. I placed my hand on his arm, feeling my father's watch warm against my wrist. The house was quiet, the air still. The storm had passed. We stood there for a long moment, bathed in the porch light, finally breathing again. When we closed the door, it felt like closing the final chapter of a painful story. A story of betrayal, resilience, and truth. A story I never wanted to live, but one that reminded me of something important. Family isn't defined by blood or marriage. Family is defined by loyalty, respect, and the ones who stand beside you when lies try to tear everything apart. And as I touched my father's watch, I whispered, "We made it, Dad."